with Phil Long for another episode of Ask the Agronomist. Our topic this week, Phil, that's come in from several viewers, is concerning fungicide and its efficacy in a dry year like this.
Yeah, exactly. I've had a lot of questions come in. I know it's on everybody's mind. You know, we got the corn and bean price on one hand, and then we've got dry conditions, which most people think, well, okay, dry conditions, what are some of the things that might happen? Well, obviously we've talked about going into pollination on corn. One of the things that should concern us is if we really are behind on moisture, you know, those silk and really the pollination not lining up with the silk coming out. That can be concerning, but we have gotten a little bit of rain. So, you know, some of those things all comes into play. We have to think about the environment and try to predict Mother Nature when we're making decisions like this. But on the other hand, it doesn't take near as much fungicide or near as much yield to pay for the fungicide. So definitely an interesting year to make that decision.
Yeah, so why don't we break it down then? Let's address corn first.
Sure. So, and I want to talk a little bit more on the side of the health benefits, because we talk a lot about disease. So disease, obviously, in a year like this when it's dry, some of that's not going to be there. Now, you know, even when we have heavy dews and hot temperatures, we still get plenty of disease potential out there typically. But if we don't have those, you know, those heavy dew mornings and we have high temperatures, a lot of times we don't see many of the corn diseases, soybean diseases that we fear the most, at least, because they require that humidity, that moisture to reproduce on the leaf and keep you know, keep moving and further on in the plant. So that's one factor that I'm going to take out a little bit, just because of the year we're looking at. We may see reduced disease potential. So in terms of that, that's the disclaimer there, that reduced disease potential, that's where we see our highest return on a fungicide application. However, there's the other side of it that we don't talk about a lot, but we hear it mentioned a lot, and that's the health benefits. So in terms of health benefits to corn or beans, we're typically talking about the strobilurin type fungicides. Those would be the ones to make sure that, you know, many of them nowadays have both triazoles and strobilurins in them. But just make sure, if that's what you're going for, those added health benefits, that you're aiming for one that has a strobilurin type fungicide. It ends in the IN that we talk about if you're looking at the active ingredient. But in terms of, you know, what's happening to the plant, one of the things that those fungicides do is it can increase the photosynthesis, which it can be a good thing, but also a bad thing when corn requires a lot of water to keep photosynthesis going. The other thing they also have been shown to do is also reduce transpiration. That's the thing that we're looking at this year in terms of conserving that moisture. Maybe a better decision in terms of corn. I mean, corn is an extremely efficient plant. When it takes up moisture, it has to move the moisture through the plant during photosynthesis. If we're getting lots of GDUs each day, you know, high temperatures, and we get a cool down at night, we're going through a lot of GDUs in a day. You know, that requires a lot of moisture, you know, especially this time. You can see the corn behind us is starting that rapid growth phase. It can use up to 2 inches a day in some cases. So it requires a lot of water to move all the nutrients and stuff through the plant to get that growth that it's putting on right now up to tassel. So that's number one thing, is it can make that process a little more efficient in terms of not losing as much moisture. So you can see some of those pictures as well on fungicides keeping the leaves unfurled or not rolled up, which obviously you would think would be a good thing typically, and that's sometimes where you can see that bump. But remember, there's a give and take there. Obviously, if you're allowing that plant to photosynthesize more, it's a very efficient plant, so you're making it more efficient in terms of photosynthesis, so it's requiring even more water too, to some extent. So there's some give and take there, and that's why I say not every hybrid responds the same. So my disclaimer here is look at the product guide. We give some basic ratings on which ones are highly recommended and so forth, and then look at the disease potential ratings, which also go into that, and make sure you understand that every hybrid's not going to respond the same to those health benefits. So important to keep in mind, especially on the corn side. You know, there's a little bit of give and take there. It can make the plant more efficient when it comes to water use, but you know, just got to keep that in mind. We got to think about all these things as we're making that decision.
Sure. Okay, so let's talk about the flip side then. How about soybeans?
Sure. So soybeans are a little bit different, you know, without getting too far into the weeds. I talk a lot about corn being a factory. It's very efficient. It's known as a C4 plant. Soybeans are not. They're a C3 plant, and unfortunately what happens with soybeans is about 25% of the time they're mistaking oxygen for CO2. We want our plants to convert CO2 to oxygen, just like the trees, but unfortunately with C3 plants like soybeans, they mistake that oxygen for CO2. So they're just a little less efficient in terms of converting that. Corn essentially saturates the system with CO2, so it doesn't make that mistake, and it's just soybeans are just not as efficient of a plant. That being said, sometimes that results in what we see in dry years for soybeans. You can actually see a yield decrease with fungicides, and that's why I would caution the use on the soybean side especially, because you can see a decrease. It's possible. It's been shown, I know, throughout the Midwest and Latham country as well. We don't get years like this very often. Obviously, I always think back to 2012. That's kind of where my mind goes, but we'll have some good data after this year, I'm sure, for those that are trying fungicides. So just be cautious about that. I would also go back to the product guide again on that. Look at the disease ratings, and then really make that decision when it comes to soybeans on the timing. When it comes to corn, we're usually on that VT to R2 time frame. That's typically always the best time to hit corn. Soybeans are a little different. We have a lot wider window, a lot more seed fill to potentially protect. Obviously, I'm kind of excluding white mold here. White mold is early R1 timing, but if you look typically at most fungicide applications on soybeans, it's at that R3 stage. So we're just getting into the seed fill period, beginning seed, beginning pod, so forth. That's what we really want to protect. So you can make it at R3, or you could potentially make it a little later. My suggestion would be to, if you have it, the fungicide on hand, great, but make that determination as soon as you can around that time frame. Are you getting moisture? Is there disease already showing up? Then go ahead and put it on. Obviously most of our fungicides are not really, they're more preventative than curative, so they're gonna help it better if you get it on earlier rather than later after the disease has already showed up. So that's one thing, but when it comes to the moisture factor, I would still say if you're getting decent moisture, then there's likely going to be a little bit more of an added benefit. On the other side, we also talk about the insects play a role in this too, and typically when it comes to soybeans, they see a benefit from adding that insecticide in there. You're going over the field already. I don't like to see us killing all the beneficials out there, but in a year like this, when we may see spider mites later season, that can also be a benefit you need to weigh. If there's a lot of insects out there in the field that we could control with that same application, all in the same trip over the field, then it would definitely be beneficial to put it all together. So just a lot of things. To me, soybeans, you got to add it all up, whether it's the environment and the situation and the particular variety that may have certain tolerances to certain diseases. But like I said, don't forget that not every soybean is going to respond necessarily to the health side of the equation when it comes to a fungicide. So pick carefully, and in a year like this, leave a pass that you don't spray. If you're doing a ground rig with soybeans, obviously you have that option. Just leave it out there so that you can evaluate whether it was worth it. We don't get these kind of situations every year, so it's a good opportunity to learn something.
All right, great tips, Phil. Thank you, viewers, for those questions. We'll be back next week for another topic.